Right. Oh, this is so exciting to see you all here. Sorry to interrupt the preliminary discussions. It's actually really encouraging to see how already you've all been talking to each other. If nothing else today, that's going to be the most useful thing that you can do. And we've been doing these briefing days for many years now, and it's usually everyone's really nervous and quite tentative and not talking to each other this early in the day. So I can tell already you're going to be a really good group. I'm Sharon, for those who haven't met you yet. I'm the manager of Latitude Global Volunteering here in New Zealand. And I just want to introduce our staff while they're all in the room before we get underway. So most of you will have met Dave. Dave is the volunteer coordinator looking after Fiji, Japan, the UK and Poland. He's kindly helping us out today. This is Anna over in the back room, at the back of the room. Anna is the VC for Spain and Ghana and is also looking after some projects for us. This is Lisa. Lisa is the volunteer coordinator for Malawi, Canada, Argentina and Ecuador. And this is Stevie, who's our marketing manager. This year we're doing something a little bit different. We have moved from our traditional base in Palmerston North, where we've always had all our staff based, to a more regional approach. So Anna's actually based in Dunedin, Lisa's in Christchurch. I just moved to Wellington last week. Dave's in Palmerston North and Stevie's in Auckland. So we've got a little bit more of a spread, which seems to be working well for us. So but anyway, about today. So the briefings really are an important part of our process with Latitude. This is the first one for the year, and you guys are obviously going to Malawi and Ghana today, so it's quite a small group. Just to give you an idea of Latitude in general, for next year, we've got volunteers going to Malawi in January, Ghana in January and September, the UK and Ireland, January, February and March. And those three countries are all departing on the same day, 2nd of January, so it's a pretty busy day for us in the office. We're going to Spain in January and September, Canada, January, March and April, Fiji. I won't run through it. Fiji, Poland, Ecuador, Japan and Argentina. So we're looking at about 170 odd New Zealand volunteers going away with Latitude next year. So I just thought it's helpful for you to have the wider picture. I guess what we're wanting to achieve today, you've already started. One of the most important things that will help you when you go in your country is to have a network of other volunteers who are in the same situation as you, experiencing the same thing and can help you in a tight spot. So meeting each other is probably the number one priority. It's great to have parents here as well, so when your son or daughter is talking to you about what they're doing with some of the other volunteers, you can kind of go, oh yeah, I remember meeting them at briefing day, which I always think is quite nice. We will talk about travel and insurance a little bit. We've changed the structure for our pre-departure briefings this year to make it a little bit more interactive. Normally in the session after morning tea we've had our travel agent, the travel doctor and the insurance broker come along. And I think it works really well for parents because they always say to me, oh thanks very much, I'm pleased you told us about this. But by about lunchtime we've noticed the volunteers just kind of glazing over and really they're not interested in how to make an insurance claim. So we will make sure you get that information, but we really want you to be interactive today and start to think about what it's going to be like, particularly going to countries like Ghana and Malawi. So we're going to break more into interactive sessions and we're going to separate the parents from the volunteers in that session as well, just so that you can be comfortable asking questions, and then we'll feedback in the group after lunch. We will have some return volunteers coming later on today. We've got two coming along who both went to Malawi. We don't have any for Ghana, obviously, because it's the first time we've gone to Ghana next year, but there will be still some benefit for you from talking to them about things that they found helpful. So do make sure you sort of grab them, and not physically grab them, but talk to them and ask as many questions as you can. And that brings us on to the next point, really. We want to make sure that you go away from here with as many of your questions answered as possible. If you're not comfortable sort of shouting out in a group, please just grab one of us during one of the breaks. But some of you have travelled a really long way to get here, so we want you to maximise that time. We want to talk about what we expect of you as volunteers, particularly while you're away. And hopefully, at the end of the day, it's starting to get a lot more real, and you're going to start to be really excited about your imminent trips. So this is what the itinerary is going to look like. You have to listen to me for the, I hate doing this bit, but it's really, really important. This is the more lecture-y bit about expectations and safety, which is absolutely critical. We will break for morning tea, where you have more opportunity to talk amongst yourselves. Then we'll have the interactive sessions. We will cater lunch. We find that it's really useful to have lunch provided, because then you don't have to go away. You're all here and you can keep talking and keep those conversations going. And the really interesting bit, I think, for you guys is the afternoon session, where we break into the separate countries. So there'll be a group for Ghana and a group for Malawi, and we'll talk more specifically about what's going to happen in those countries. A few housekeeping rules. There's toilets if you go out this door, and just keep going straight ahead. There is bathrooms. The exit is out the front, and there are some stairs, which I can never remember where they are, but I will check and come back to you on that if we need to evacuate. Right. One of the first things that we really want to cover is that going away on a placement with Latitude is not a holiday. You will have some amazing travel opportunities and the opportunity to do all sorts of amazing things, but it's actually a lot bigger than that, and sometimes you don't sort of appreciate the longer term benefits this early on in the piece. But more importantly, as volunteers, you have the opportunity to really develop and get some skills that are going to be really useful down the track in terms of employability, being attractive for getting into courses. And it's quite hard to identify some of those things. So we want you to set some learning goals. You haven't had the forms yet, but you will get those shortly. We did a survey of former volunteers a couple of years ago, and it was generally really, really positive. And these are some of the things that people felt they got out of the experience. Most of you, when we've interviewed you, it's really common for people to say they want to become more confident, become more independent. That's pretty much a given. But there is a whole lot of other things that you can get out of this experience. So just by thinking about that as we go through the day will help you identify some of the things that you really want to achieve while you're on your placement. So you can think of some goals. These are some examples that you might want to do: gaining new skills, meeting new people. People going to Ghana and Malawi obviously going to learn about a whole new culture, which is really, really exciting, but even specific things about getting some experience, maybe working with children or being a teacher. You also need to think about how you might change through this experience. You'll see when we have our return volunteers coming in later on the day, most of them, one of them just was away earlier this year and one last year. So they're only really probably a year or two older than you, but it's quite impressive sometimes when you see how confident they are. Huh? No, I'm good, thanks. So you certainly notice a development in the young people who are away, but some of the sort of less easy to identify things are things like being more tolerant, and as young people, often it's all about us this is me putting myself in your shoes because I'm not a young person anymore. But, it's about what you want. But when you put young people living together in an environment, it's really interesting. They're from very different backgrounds. They don't often know each other. And there's a potential for some friction there. So you have to learn to compromise, talking to new people, doing public speaking, particularly the guys. We really notice this. They're really reluctant often at this stage in the process to talk in front of a group, and then they'll come back and talk to our information nights or in front of a group of people like you with ease. It's really cool to see. And the last point I always put in there, because the mums particularly really like that, we've had a lot of feedback over the years that you become more independent, but some of the basics like being able to cook and clean and live independently were things that you'll get out of this experience. And you need to be really clear on some of the other issues, like setting really clear goals, because we will review this with you while you're in country. So think about, I want to learn the language of where I'm going to. And they do have, even though they both speak English, in Ghana and Malawi, they do have local dialects that you certainly can learn, and it's always a good thing to try. You might be wanting to learn specific things about how to manage working with a group of young children or plan a lesson, and just social etiquette. So as we go through the day, that's some of the things that I really want you to put some thought in. Now, this is about the expectations that we have of you. So as I said, it's not a holiday. You are going to be on placement representing us as Latitude, your families, and us as New Zealanders. And we want you to take that seriously. You're going to be treated and expected to behave as a member of staff in the placements that you're going to. And for some of you, you haven't finished school yet. That's going to happen in a few more weeks. And it's quite a big transition, especially for those of you who might be in a school placement. We have quite a number of community work placements in Ghana as well, where you'll meet other professionals. So it's a big step up. But generally our volunteers really do very well. And so we expect you to act professionally and responsibly while you're at your placement. We do recognise that you are young people and you want to have a good time as well. So some of the things that we'll talk about later on this afternoon is a lot of you are living and working sort of in your placement environment. Go away from that environment in your time off and sort of relax a little bit, but try and be professional when you are in placement. We want you to put yourself out there and really challenge yourself. And as I said, I can see that you guys are going to do well already because you've already started talking to people the minute you walked in the door. And that's quite unusual, as I said. So when you're at your placement, make the most of all the opportunities. You might be invited to go to a wedding in the community that you're going to, or even to a church, which is a big part of some of the communities that you're going to. Take those opportunities and be involved in the community, and then you'll find that that develops into lots more opportunities as well. So don't kind of just sit in your room, in your little house, and certainly don't sort of stay on. You will have, some of you, quite good access to things like Facebook. And if you're in your room communicating to everyone back here, you might as well stay here. You want to really be immersed in the community that you're going to. You will have seen the Code of Conduct. We sent that out to you with your offer letters. Presumably you read it because you've all signed it. But just to point out a couple of key points there. Any form of drug taking, that illegal drug taking, will result in you being dismissed from your placement. It's not acceptable on a Latitude placement anywhere in the world. Every year I say that, and every year we have one or sometimes two people who disregard that. Actually, I don't think we've had any this year. That would be the first time in 10 years that I've been the manager. So not only is it unacceptable, what it would mean is you could be asked to leave your placement that day, particularly if you've had drugs on the premises or where you're staying. And we won't find you another placement if you've been dismissed from your placement for taking drugs. So what it effectively means is that you will have to leave. We expect you to behave as adults as well, so we try and have sort of some confidentiality clauses that we expect you then to explain to your parents why you are leaving. We had a situation a few years ago where one young man, he was in the UK and he got dismissed for taking drugs, but he didn't tell his mum, and he told her that he was coming home because he's really homesick. And so then his mum was ringing up the travel agent and getting quite abusive, saying, well, he needs to get home, he's really distressed, and why aren't you doing anything? And then she started ringing me and was saying, come on, why aren't you guys acting more promptly? And so in the end, I had to tell her, look, the reason he's been dismissed is because he was caught taking drugs, and, you know, it's not an emergency, he's not distressed, and we're working with it, but it's not quite the situation she was thinking of. So we don't want to be in that situation with any of you. So the best thing is not to take the drugs, but more importantly, it's illegal in all of the countries that you're going to. And if you are in a situation where you have been caught with illegal drugs and the local police become involved, there's nothing that really we as Latitude can do to help you out of that situation. And you never, ever want to be in a situation in a foreign country where you've been arrested for drug use. So, simple thing is, don't do it. Actually though, we have more issues with alcohol, which generally isn't illegal in all the countries we go to, particularly if you're already 18 when you get there. So we're certainly not saying don't drink alcohol, but we are saying to you, use your discretion about when and where and how much you drink. So you need to think about safety. Often you might have to, travel to get home. Certainly in Africa you might have to walk somewhere, so you don't want to be walking home at night drunk. You wouldn't walk home at night here often. So why some young people think it's okay to do that in another country, I'm not sure. So don't do that. But also, as I said before, think about you're living and working in often a small community. And so if you come staggering home at night and go shh, as people always do, and trying to be quiet, but actually it's really noisy when you do that, shh, at 3 o'clock in the morning and trip over, and potentially wake up the whole village, they're going to just lose their respect for you as well. So it's just not a good look. So as I said, when you're in your placements, be involved in the community, show you're responsible, and then if you want to go and have a few drinks, do that when you've had a weekend away. You can meet up as a group of volunteers and just chill out a bit, and if you want to have a couple of drinks, then that's fine, but nobody needs to see that. And just don't overindulge. The other thing you want to be careful of is relationships, particularly with students or other people that you might be dealing with at your placement. If you're in some of the schools, particularly in Africa, the students, even though a lot of you might be dealing with, say, what would be called Form 1 or Form 3, which is like year 9 or 11 here, the age of the students that you will be working with might not necessarily be what you would expect here in New Zealand. They might not have had access to education until a little bit later on, so they could actually potentially be a lot older than you. So again, if you keep in mind being professional, don't have a relationship with any of the students that you're working with, and that's the same if you're working in a community placement or Football for Hope in Ghana. You'll be working with all sorts of people. And when I'm talking about having a relationship, I'm talking about don't have sex with the students. And I'm going to be really specific about that, because I used to say don't sleep with them, and one of the young men who got himself into a bit of strife, and I happened to be visiting, and he said to me, but there was no sleeping involved. So don't have sex with them, right? It's a true story. All of my stories are true. You wouldn't believe what we come across. Just to put that in context, I find it really interesting. Put your hands up if you think it's more likely to be the males or the females. So hands up if you think it's more likely to be females who are sleeping with their students. And the males? Yeah, actually, the last 5 years it's been the females. Interesting, eh? And not necessarily in the countries that you're going to. Often in sort of more developed countries. However, we have had over the years volunteers having relationships with people in Malawi, particularly. We haven't been to Ghana before. And there's a whole lot of wider context that you need to think about as well. You know, you're from a Western country, you will be seen to be very affluent. You'll probably be asked to marry somebody on the first day you're there, but that's okay, that's just normal. But it's true, especially if they like people who are a little bit overweight. So I got asked to get married 6 times on the first day I was there. But you're going to leave, and there's longer term implications of the impact on the person you have a relationship with and the village, and expectations that they might have become unrealistic of having a relationship with a Westerner. So it's not just about having a relationship that you need to think about. So don't do that. And the other thing that you should consider is be careful about having a relationship with other volunteers, particularly if you're at the same placement. As young people, sometimes relationships fluctuate a little bit. They might be quite short term, and that's normal. But the problem is you guys have spent a lot of money and a lot of effort to get there. And if you have a relationship with a volunteer who's at the same placement with you and it doesn't work, it's going to be really uncomfortable for the rest of that sort of 6 months that you're having to live and work together. And it potentially just could ruin that whole experience. So not saying don't have any relationships with other volunteers, but try and keep them at a distance so that it doesn't ruin your opportunities as well. We're nearly through the heavy going stuff. It is important that you follow the rules at your placement. Sometimes you might think that the rules are, they don't make sense or they're a stupid rule. Particularly if you're, say, in an environment like an all-girls school, for example, they might have rules to say you can't have visitors come and stay. They might say particularly no male visitors if you're living on site. And you think, well, that's a bit unfair because my friends up the road at their placement, they can have visitors. So the placement is always going to be concerned with the safety and the needs of their students. And so it is quite common in an environment where there's all girls to say, no, we can't have people come and stay. So it's about communicating with them. If you're not sure why a rule is in place, just ask them and make sure that you do stick to them. And also particularly follow advice from the local people. So there could be all sorts of health and safety sort of things about drinking water, particularly in Africa, what is safe and isn't. If they're saying it's going to be a rainstorm coming, the storms are pretty spectacular in the rainy season, but they might be saying it's not safe to travel, we're expecting floods. So listen to that advice. If you're planning to go away somewhere for the weekend, just check in with the locals and say, look, we're thinking about going here, what do you think? But they know what they're doing, they live there, and respect their advice. Having said that, also the placements that you're going to rely quite heavily on having you in their placement, particularly in Malawi and Ghana. They're very under-resourced often. And so we expect you to stay really for the entirety of your placement. If you leave early, sometimes it can mean that that class doesn't have a teacher because they were planning on you being there to take the class. It sometimes is difficult for them to find a replacement, especially if it's just for a short period of time. So again, leaving early has some implications for your whole placement. Having said that, it doesn't mean you should stay in a placement and be absolutely miserable. I'm talking about if you think, I've just had enough, I'm going to go home. There are all sorts of things that we will do to help and support you if you're struggling in a placement, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what I'm talking about here is if you think, I've done the travelling I want to do, I'm just going to go home. That's not really what we're about. So please try and fulfil the commitment. You know how long you're expected to be there, and don't make other travel arrangements just because it suits you. Particularly if you're in a school placement, the holidays are quite set and structured, so that makes it easy. You know when you've got some time off. Sometimes they have a 3 or 4 week break in the middle of your placements. It's the end of term, and that's an opportunity for you to travel. If you are in a school, then we would expect that you don't take time off during the term because you have set holidays. We do have a lot of parents who then ask, when's a good time to go over? So we can try and find out that information for you if you are in a school when the holidays are, if you haven't had it already. If you're in more of a community-based placement, it's a little less clear and often a lot more flexible. You certainly can take time off. Often they might say if there's a group of volunteers in a placement, you can't all go at the same time because they might have to keep operating, so they need staff. But you can ask for time off, and particularly if you were wanting to do it, say, at the same time as some of the volunteers in the schools who you knew were going to be travelling and you wanted to meet up with them. The key is about communication and asking well in advance and planning, not just leaving it to the last minute and assuming that you can go off on take next week off, because again, sometimes they are relying quite heavily on you doing something. So always ask your host with as much preparation as possible if you want to take time off. Often your visas, which neither of you have applied for yet, are specific to you being on a placement with Latitude. You'll have letters of invitation from your host. So in some of the countries that we go to, if you leave, then your visa isn't valid and you may have to reapply for like a visitor's visa. And none of the countries that you're going to enable you to do extra paid work. It's not a work permit, it's a placement that's specific to you volunteering with Latitude. So you can't work anywhere else. You can do other volunteer work often, but not paid work. Right, that's the end of the serious stuff. Well, that part of the serious stuff. Just wanted to check with you, what are the kind of 4 key things that as volunteers you shouldn't be doing? Yep.
Sure.
Nice. 1?
Having relationships with local people.
Nice, good. Yeah, just checking that you're still listening. Yeah, 2 more. Yep.
Excessive drinking.
Good. And just be careful on the relationships with each other. So that wasn't a definitely don't do, but it's in that same category. I know it's heavy going, but it's really important that we put that out there. Right, so we certainly see that you going on a placement is a bit of a 3-way partnership between things that we are responsible with as Latitude, things that we expect you as volunteers to be responsible for, and things that your host placement should be looking at. And if we all work together, generally it all works really, really well. So what we do is that when we're working in a country, we have staff members who live in that country who know those conditions. They build relationships with the hosts. They've visited all the placements. We do country risk assessments and placement risk assessments. So we're visiting the placements every cycle, checking what the living conditions are like, which varies in all sorts of countries. Certainly if you're going to Ghana or Malawi, your living conditions are going to be really different to some of our volunteers who be in a boarding school in the UK, but it's appropriate to the country that you're living in. They are sort of key people when you get there. They will do orientations on arrival, and they are local people who have a good understanding of what to expect in that country, and they're there to provide that support for you in country, as are we back here. We do find that a lot of people have had a lot of contact, particularly with your volunteer coordinators as you work through the process, and you've met us all today, and we'll see you at the airport when you leave. So sometimes you feel like you've got a good relationship, or perhaps more of a relationship here with the staff in New Zealand, so it's absolutely fine to keep in touch with us and we can provide some advice. But often it means that we will go back to the local staff to check things out as well. But we have staff in country in all of the placements that you go to, and we do have an emergency cell phone number so that you can contact them if you're having any problems. What we expect you as volunteers to do is be prepared. So being here today is one of the hopefully most useful things that you've done, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to come here today. But when we send emails out, for a start, check your emails, please. When we're dealing with a lot of people, it's quite frustrating when you have to go to people 5 or 6 times and go, have you applied for your visa? I sent you the email 3 months ago. So we will follow up with you and check, because a lot of people would never go anywhere if we didn't follow up, but it does create a lot of extra work if we're having to chase people. We know you're all busy, and a lot of you have got exams coming up shortly as well, but just keep an eye on your emails, and then you'll know what's coming out. But we do expect you to read the information when you have got time. We are videoing some of these sessions today, and we will send you those links out. You've had essential information packs coming. We will have visa instructions coming. So there's a lot of information to process, but it's your experience. So the more prepared you are, the easier it's going to be when you get there. So we send you that stuff for a reason. You can do additional research yourself. Particularly, it's great to see that a lot of you have already been communicating in Facebook, because we set up closed Facebook groups for all of the volunteers going to a country. You'll see the return volunteers today. They're great people to talk to and ask questions. You can certainly Google the countries you're going to, or the placements when you get the placement details, and look at things like the New Zealand Government Safe Travel websites, which will give you sort of safety advice about the country that you're going to for your placement, and certainly additional countries that you're planning to travel to. And as I said before, things like the Code of Conduct, you need to know what's in it, because we don't hate to think that you got dismissed from a placement because you didn't know that it wasn't okay to do some of that stuff. So if you do those things, you're going to be fine. The hosts, for example, they have a key role, because they're the people that really you're going to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we expect them to be as clear as possible about what you're supposed to be doing. Sometimes that is a little bit confusing, or they might be a little bit vague. And probably one of the most common issues as volunteers you will have is perhaps feeling like you haven't got enough to do. It's about finding a balance between not, wearing you out. Particularly in Malawi or Ghana, life itself is a little bit more challenging than day-to-day basis here. So you might think initially you might only have, say, 4 hours work a day. And you think, I'll do some more. And it's not uncommon for our volunteers to be involved in community projects and all sorts of things. But I would just caution you to just wait until you've settled in and know your routine. So, for example, you might only have 4 hours work a day, but you might have to walk half an hour to get to your house after work. You might then have to go and get water from the borehole, light a fire to boil the water and cook a meal. So that can take several hours in addition to your work. It's not like here where you can come home if you're tired and just shove something in the microwave. So you have to just figure out how life works and get into a routine, and then you'll know what you can manage. If you burn yourself out, you're not going to be able to help anyone, and most of you are going because you really want to help in that community. So just be careful about that. So the host should be clear about what's expected. They should have a person who's your sort of go-to contact person. Sometimes it's the manager of an organisation or the principal of a school. Sometimes it might be a head teacher, or might be a specific subject or area that you're working in would be the main contact person. And that person is really the person you'll go to if you need a little bit more help. So you might, your bed might break, or the wall of your house might cave in or something, so you can go to them and they will help organise fixing some of those day-to-day processes. And if they don't, then the Latitude staff are there as that sort of backup as well. They also know what we expect of you as volunteers, and so we expect them, if you're not performing, to let our staff know as well. So I guess the whole thing, if we're talking about working together, works really well. We select you, as you know, you've all had interviews. We've talked about what country you want to go to. You've had an interview with the staff member in the country that you want to go to. So we're all clear that we think that you're appropriate for the role that you're going to be given. The preparation phase is going on now, and today, as I said, is a key part of that. We check out those placements. We support you when you get there through orientation and placement visits, and help with emergencies. So all of those things happen sort of all the time. So there is kind of a process of what you should do should you have any problems. So you remember when I was saying before, we expect you to stay in your placement for the duration that you're committed to. It's not always going to be easy, and we understand it. And really that's the whole point of going through an organisation like Latitude, is that when you are having a tough time, we are there to provide some support. So as I was just saying, kind of the people at your placement are going to be your day-to-day go-to people. Like, my drop toilet's not working, or what do I do? How do I make a new one? Those kind of things that you might not know about, which is pretty easy for them to fix for you if you're in Malawi or Ghana. Now the key thing is about communication. As young people, when you're going to a new country, sometimes you're a bit uncomfortable asking for help. If you try and just get on with it, or you don't like to seem to be a nuisance or annoying people, and sometimes you don't like to ask for help. The key thing you should do is always ask for help, because little problems, if you don't do anything about them, build and build and build and become big problems. And the little problems are usually pretty easily fixed. Things like, you might be too cold. Now you think, that sounds stupid because you're going to Africa, right? Well, when I went to Malawi, I was really surprised. I can't remember when I went. February? There was a drought here, and it poured with rain every day that I was there. It was just completely not what I was expected, and it got quite cold in the evenings. So you might find that you might need an extra blanket. As I said, we had a few years ago, one of the guys, they had like a clay hut that was built with clay bricks that they made in the village, but it was quite an old, and it actually, the wall actually did sort of fall. So they worked with the village and built a whole new house, and that was quite an exciting part of their experience, learning to make the bricks and building the house and contributing something back to the volunteers, to the community. But had that stayed, it would have been a pretty big problem if the wall fell in, or if it rained in the middle of the night. So day-to-day stuff, try talking to local representatives or the people at your placement first. Now, they might kind of go, yeah, and say they'll do something about it, but not. People get busy or they forget, and that puts you in a really uncomfortable position because you've been brave enough to ask for help, and then if nothing's done about it, then you're like, now what do I do? That's when you can call Latitude to provide some additional support. Now, in most of the countries, we have what we call local reps. They're more volunteer staff. They're a bit more spread out throughout the country, and you generally would meet them at orientation, but they might be a little bit closer to you than where the country manager of the country lives, given that often our placements are spread out through the whole country. So if it's, again, a sort of a small thing, the local reps are often the next point of call, because you've met them, they know the hosts, they generally will come and visit your placement. So you can say to them, look, the wall's falling down in my house, I've told the school principal, he said he'd fix it, that was 2 weeks ago, nothing's happened, what should I do? And they would either be able to talk to the school directly or give you some advice about how to get some action happening. If nothing happens then, you can go straight to the country manager. So in Malawi, that's Matt, who we'll talk about this afternoon. Or in Ghana, it's Nana. They're both, Nana is Ghanaian, Matt is American, but he's lived in Malawi for 10, 12 years. I think he would just about say he was a local person himself. But they're the country managers. They live there, they've got the networks, and they can help you with more serious situations, or if you're trying those things, as we discussed, about smaller issues that are not getting resolved. The key thing to note is they can't help you if you don't tell them there's a problem. All right? And that's what I'm saying. Don't sort of sit there going, my wall's fallen down, it's been the rainy season for the last 3 weeks, every night I'm getting flooded, and not do anything about it, because then you're going to get sick, you're going to feel miserable, and it's in that kind of situation we think, I'm just going to give up and go home. We don't want you to be in that situation. We're there to help you, but we can't read your mind, so do tell the country staff. As I said though, you have met us, you might feel more comfortable talking to us, so we have Facebook, Messenger, you can use WhatsApp, you can send us an email, you can call the landline if you've got credit on your phones, and then we can again give you some advice or make sure the local staff are following up what should be happening. So that's the volunteer coordinators generally that you've been dealing with, so Lisa for Malawi or Anna for Ghana. And then there's me as the manager. And I tell you what, if you ring me, it'll get fixed. Don't you worry about that. Right. So we're all clear. The key message about problems is tell someone about it, even if it's a small problem, and we can give you some advice and tell you what to do. In terms of then more serious issues, I guess that's what we are there for. To help you out. Generally, as I said before, things work pretty well, but when there is a big issue, it tends to be pretty spectacular, and you need the sort of resources of an organisation. So one of the things that I like about the job is you never quite know what's going to happen when you come to work. You think you've got a bit of a plan, and then you'll get a call from one of the countries or a parent, and that puts plan B into action. There are bigger issues like we've had in Fiji the year before last. The volunteers had just arrived. We had Cyclone Winston, and they'd just had orientation. Luckily, one of the things they talked about was what to do in a cyclone, and they were literally in their villages for 4 days. And some of their villages were completely wiped out. But we worked with the country manager. We had a management network based in the UK, and we had conference calls daily to make a plan of divvying up resources. The country manager in Fiji drove around and visited everybody in the island, which was logistically quite challenging because obviously trees were down, power was out. Sometimes we could communicate better with the volunteers through Facebook phone lines were down. Facebook seems to work in some of those situations. We had the same thing here in the Christchurch earthquake was on. You could message people. And so between us, we were all locating the volunteers, checking on who was okay, who needed sort of evacuating. And there was a huge network supporting all of the volunteers in country. So when there's big stuff, that's what we're there for. If it's even bigger than that, we were working with MFAT, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, here in New Zealand. So the government has wider networks, and they also party up often with the Australians. In countries like Malawi and Ghana, we'd often work with the Foreign Office in the UK because they have good networks over there as well. So I guess really that's what you're going through an organisation like Latitude for, is that support if there is a problem. Most of, I would say probably 95%, if not more, of our volunteers really don't need any support at all. You'll have a great time and you'll do really, really well, and it'll be a really good experience. But there will be some people who struggle, despite what we try and put you in the right place, and every now and then there's maybe one that isn't quite right. And then, if you're trying all those things that we talked about before, and it's not working, then we can move you to another placement. We're not going to just leave you stranded. So as I said before, tell us if you've got an issue. The other thing, if you look at the bottom point in here, don't just worry your parents. I mean, certainly tell your parents if there's a problem, but it's not much use ringing them up, particularly with time difference, which might be the middle of the night here, and say, oh, Mum, the bus hasn't gone, I'm stuck in Mazuzu. And they're like, I don't know what to do. So then they're going to ring us in the New Zealand office. We're like, well, we don't really know what to do either. So we'll ring Matt in Malawi, he'll ring you, and he'll say, oh, there'll be another bus in a couple of hours, just hang tight. And that'll be fun. Then he'll ring us back to say that that's what happened, and we'll ring the parents, and it'll be all sorted. But it's the long way round, okay? So, if you do that, we'll deal with it. But what it does is really stress out, particularly your mums, if you're ringing up, or dads are like, oh my God, I'm powerless, I don't know what to do. They don't like that. Dads like to be able to fix a problem straight away. So, local situations like that, deal with the country staff. And that leads us quite nicely on into homesickness. It's a big issue. There's no kind of rule of who's going to get homesickness or when people might get homesick. We have a lot of times when people go, oh, no, I've been at boarding school for 5 years. I'm used to being away from it. I'll be fine. It doesn't work like that. You might have a bad day, or it might be someone's birthday or something like that could trigger homesickness pretty easily. And I guess that's why you've got a network of other volunteers. I don't think we've ever had a situation where all the volunteers in one country have been homesick on the same day. So the point is, you might be having a bad day, talk to some of the other volunteers. And if someone's messaging you and say, hey, I'm having a bit of a rough time, then it's really your responsibility as a group of volunteers to say, hey, well, why don't we meet up in the weekend, come and stay, or have something to look forward to, because that could be you in a couple of weeks' time who's also having a bad day. So we expect you to look after each other. But don't ring home all the time. What it does is it connects you back here all the time. Technology these days is not always helpful. It means you can communicate very easily, but sometimes it's too easy. So you can have a situation where people are not even through immigration at the airport, and they're messaging back home. And then they're on Facebook all night talking to their friends about the party that they're going to back here in New Zealand and feeling like they're missing out. You're in another country. You're having an amazing time. Who cares about the party back here? It'll be the same party next year, I'll tell you. Same people, same place probably. Don't worry about it. But be involved in what you're doing over there. So sometimes too much contact back home can make it harder for you to settle in. We do have some parents who want to talk to their kids every day. That's not always helpful. In general, I would say once a week is probably a good amount, and generally maybe on a Monday. Because once you're in your placement and doing your routine, there's actually nothing really much to say. It's the same as yesterday. And then it's like, how was today? You're good. What'd you do? Usual. And, it gets a bit ho-hum. But a Monday's good because you might have been away for the weekend. You say, oh my gosh, we went to Victoria Falls. It was amazing. There's a whole group of us. We've got this whole list of positive things to talk about. So try and focus on the positives. If you are having a bad day, talk to other volunteers and try and get through it. If you ring home, which is absolutely fine, sometimes it makes you feel better. You're on your phone, oh my gosh, I hate it here. Mum or dad are going, oh my gosh. You feel much better because you've spoken to them, and then you might go off and play a game of football after that phone call. Mum and dad will be at home going, oh my gosh. And as I said before, they'll be ringing up the Latitude office, and they'll ring me, we'll ring them, we'll ring you. No, I'm fine, I've just been playing football. So just think about those things. And parents, it goes the other way as well. If you are getting regular phone calls from your son or daughter, just say to them, look, have you tried meeting up with the volunteers? Have you talked to the country manager? And try and encourage them. You can ring us every day and we'll help you get through that, because it's very stressful as a parent if you know your son or daughter is struggling in another country. So that's fine. But don't deal with them directly yourself, and if you can avoid it, because it's just going to sort of prolong the situation. Right. That's right, I'm looking at two different things. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm running way over time. I'm not over time. When you're sitting there, you're like, as if I would have to hurry up, sorry. Right, so one of the key things about being prepared is doing your research, as I said. So we've already covered that. Make sure you talk to other volunteers about things like, people always say, should I take a backpack or a suitcase, or what kind of footwear? Talk to the volunteers. They will be able to say, oh, I found this really, really useful, or I took this and it was a complete waste of time. So they're the experts. We'll help you where we can, but the more preparation that you can do before you go, as I said, the better. Things like travel insurance is compulsory for all of our volunteers. We have a policy that we've negotiated through Allianz. It's a new company for us this year. QBE, the company we have used for the last 5 years, is not operating in New Zealand anymore, which is a shame. But it covers you for things that we think are really important. It's not just like medical insurance, which is important, but things like cancellation, repatriation. So if something happens to an immediate family member back here, it may be covered for you to come home. We have had things like somebody had a car accident, or an elderly grandparent might have passed away, and in that situation there's no right or wrong, but some people would like to come home and be with family, and if it's in the first half of your placement, then we can, as long as there's no pre-existing medical conditions, you can use your travel insurance to go back. Yep.
Sharon, I just wanted to say we used Allianz last year when we went to Sri Lanka as a family, and Felix got bitten by a dog, so there was concern about rabies. They were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
So if anybody's thinking about whether they would prefer another company, I just know from our own personal experience they were absolutely
Oh, that's really good.
Quibble, settled really quick, and we had direct contact with medical people to talk about what it was that they were supposed to be doing.
Oh, great. We've been really impressed, and we've spent a lot of time negotiating, as did the travel agent. The other thing is, it's helpful in an emergency if you are on the same policies. When the cyclones were in, we go straight to the managers. So I've got 10 volunteers here, I need them evacuated, bang, bang, bang. Rather than going, now, what are you covered for? Have you got this covered? And, oh, hang on, I've just got to read the fine print. So, we try and negotiate the heavily discounted policies to make them competitive. And if you are comfortable with that, we do recommend it, but you are more than welcome to look at other policies as well. But in an emergency, it is a hell of a lot easier for us to act effectively if you're all covered by the same thing. So yeah, travel insurance is compulsory. You will get information about Allianz, or you should have it already, from the travel agents. And we'll talk this afternoon about money and what's relevant, but make sure you get that organised if you're going to have things like cash passports or a debit card, and having two options is really good. Thinking about what currency are you going to take, because you can't buy like kwacha, which is the Malawian currency here, so US dollars is a much more appropriate type of currency. Be organised about those things. You must definitely go to the travel doctors for a consultation. So we've done the medicals. That's really just helpful for us to make sure that we are taking into account any medical conditions when we place you in a placement, and that we put supports around you. But for most of the countries that we are operating it in, we then say it's compulsory for you to go to a travel doctor and get advice about which vaccinations are relevant for you, and your travel plans and your medical histories. And even if you weren't going to, like say if you're going to the UK, which is not compulsory, we still recommend that you would go to a travel doctor, because they can give you specialist travel advice. A lot of young female volunteers here, so about feminine hygiene, contraception for being away from home, all that kind of stuff that they understand from a travel perspective. And certainly vaccinations in countries like Malawi and Ghana are a lot more involved than what your local GP often has the knowledge to deal with. So we do recommend a travel doctor. You also need to start thinking about how to be healthy while you're away. You know, you're going to have a different diet, you'll be tired, you'll be jet lagged, all sorts of stuff going on. So think about, we'll take responsibility for making sure you're eating like fresh fruit or vegetables when you can. Taking multivitamins, I think, is always really useful. You don't want to get sick if you can avoid it. Taking a first aid kit with you is really important. And again, talk to the travel doctor about what you should have in there. So certainly you should have the stuff if you get quick tummy, because probably most of you will. But they have really good little kits of stages of things that you can try this, and if that doesn't work, you try that, and if that doesn't work, then you have that. And then generally, as Stevie can tell you from when he was in India, that works. Definitely anti-malarial medication for both of the countries that you're going to is an absolute must. For Ghana, yellow fever is compulsory. It's a World Health Organization requirement for the visa, and in a lot of African countries it's a requirement to cross borders. So Malawi itself doesn't require you to have yellow fever, but going next door to some of the neighbouring countries does. So that's what I'm talking about when you say consult with the travel doctor about what your plans are. Packing your luggage. We're pretty cruisy in our country, you know. Some of you might still be in neighbourhoods where, you know, you don't lock your door, you leave the windows open. I still do. You know, we might be at the airport and you just leave your bag there and go and grab something from the cafe, because you can kind of keep an eye on it. You have to be a lot more savvy when you're travelling overseas. And you're not going to have mum or dad there to organise you. Things like, the biggest thing, it starts at the check-in counter here. And you know, you're checking in on big planes, there's usually queues of people, and so you don't want to keep people behind you waiting up. So you go up to the counter or the machines, and you have your passport out and you get all your stuff, and then you walk away holding all this stuff, right? Don't. Stop, put it away, put it in your bag, zip it up, be organised, and then walk away. I don't know how many people have left their passports on the counter because they're in a hurry. Just those little things can make a big difference, and probably your passport is the number one thing you don't want to lose when you're travelling overseas, because it's just a hassle. You can't go anywhere. If you've left your placement country, you can't go back till you get your passport fixed. And actually, we were talking about that as a group of managers. Our British manager sent me an email a couple of days ago saying, oh, this could be a scenario we could talk about at pre-departure briefings or orientation. There was a guy who went to the UK, from the UK to somewhere like Spain, and he lost his passport, and he was stuck there for a month by the time they reissued his passport and his visa and all that kind of stuff. And I was saying, yeah, and then I was saying, oh, we've had volunteers this year lose their passport in Bolivia, and they were supposed to be in Argentina, and someone was in Poland travelling in Europe and they lost their passport and it's still not resolved. You know, it happens often. So look after your passport and your luggage. Don't leave it anywhere, even going to the toilet. It's a nuisance, but you have to try and lug your stuff into the toilet and keep it with you at all times. Don't give it to someone else to carry for you, or don't certainly carry anyone else's luggage, because you don't know what's in it. And you know, you see lots of stories in the news about people who've been unintentionally drug mules because they've given you something to take through. So you just be sensible about those things. When you're away, avoid like protests. You would have seen on the news lately, Spain, for example, is a country that we're going to. Big protests in Barcelona at the moment. Protests at any time, even if they're peaceful, can get out of control. There were a lot of protests in Poland last year, another country we go to. Something to be aware of is things like elections in African countries. And I know certainly they always email the volunteers and say, look, there's an election coming up this weekend, don't travel, because things can just get a little bit out of control in some of those situations. So that's what I was referring to about taking local advice, and just check things out when you're going anywhere. As I said before, check things out from the local people about advice on travelling, and do your research online. You should also research the local customs. You're going to countries that are really different to here, and that makes it really exciting. But there are some sort of things that they would find offensive. We'll talk about some of that this afternoon, and certainly in orientation, particularly as young women, you want to be quite conservative in things like your dress, to not draw attention to yourself or offend people or put yourself in an unsafe situation. So things like don't swim at the beach in a bikini, wear shorts and t-shirt. It's just less attention seeking. You know, you're going to be going to a country, and it might be the first time for many of you that you're going to be the odd one out in terms of looking different, and it's quite an uncomfortable feeling until you get used to it, and it's probably nothing that you've ever experienced before, and that's fine. But things like not drawing extra attention to yourself will help you particularly. Be really respectful of particularly religious sites or historical sites. Watch what other people were doing if you're going into them, or how they're dressed, or things like taking your shoes off sometimes, or covering your head might be appropriate behaviour, so that you aren't offending the locals. And things like, if you're going to a really poor country, taking photos, because it's really interesting. So I was in Morocco last year, and you through all the markets, and it's just interesting. You want to take photos all the time, but that's their livelihood, and they're very poor, and it's really rude to just go and take photos of them. So better thing to do would be to maybe buy something from them and then say, oh, would you mind if I took a photo? Because they're relying on you as a Westerner to do business. So if you were talking to them at your stall, they're really expecting you to buy something. So it's not always a good thing to just snap photos. Having said that, in Malawi, the kids will be like bombarding you to take photos, and almost they could just about spend the whole day. You almost have to say, stand back, because they're too close. That if they're asking for a photo, that's okay, but don't assume that you, as a Westerner with your fancy camera, can just go snapping photos of people. And particularly, you have to think about, we're a very liberal country. We have just passed, laws as quite a world-leading country for gay marriage and things like that. It's not the same in all countries, particularly in Africa. So you can't assume that things like being gay is well received or even legal in a lot of the countries. Women's rights are a whole different kettle of fish in most of those countries. So you can't go in there and tell them how they should do their country. And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about this afternoon, about how you're going to deal with situations that you might think, oh, that's not okay, we don't do that in New Zealand. But that's part of the experience and part of the learning of actually having a global perspective and coming back and realising actually how lucky we are here in New Zealand, and trying to make change in a very small way. So while we're thinking about not offending people, I've got a couple of videos for you to watch.
Arrested and now facing possible jail, 4 young travellers hauled before a court for what they thought was some harmless fun. Their crime, posing for this naked photo on Malaysia's highest peak. An innocent picture to them, but a grave insult to others. One of the group is British student Eleanor Hawkins. The 24-year-old was on a break from studying for a master's degree in aerospace engineering when she was detained before boarding a flight to Kuala Lumpur. A fellow traveller posted this reaction online.
Well, I put it up and I included 3 photos of myself on mountaintops, and of course all hell broke loose. I was only insulting Malaysia.
It's understood he too has since been arrested. Mount Kinabalu is a sacred site in Malaysia, and the group have been accused of angering the mountain's spirits, and that their photograph was the cause of this, a 6-magnitude earthquake which struck last Friday, killing 18 people. Eleanor Hawkins' father has released this statement. We managed to speak to Ellie yesterday morning and she is obviously quite scared and upset. She knows what she did was stupid and disrespectful and is very sorry for the offence that she has caused the Malaysian people. She has never been in any sort of trouble before. We hope that the Malaysian authorities deal with the misdemeanour and not link it to the unfortunate tragic events that occurred the following week. Travel experts say people need to be more careful of cultural sensitivities abroad.
Probably if someone would strip naked at Westminster Abbey, I think that probably would be a similar kind of sacred site for a lot of Christians here in the United Kingdom, and so that's probably an apt comparison.
Eleanor's family will be hoping that the photo will be seen as an innocent misunderstanding when those arrested appear back in court next Monday.
I know none of you are going to Malaysia, but it's a really good example. Again, we're friends with all our volunteers on Facebook. I have lost count of how many naked photos I've seen, or people with their pants down on tops of the mountains in Europe, the salt flats in South America, Machu Picchu, yeah, not Machu Picchu, and the same in Africa. It's offensive. So just think about these things. So it goes on.
Now, all of this started when photographs of these naked tourists were circulating online, showing them naked near the peak of Mount Kinabalu, which is considered sacred for locals here. There's lots of indigenous groups in Sabah state, and they believe it's the final resting spot for the spirits of their ancestors. And the Deputy Chief Minister of Sabah had said that he saw a direct correlation, a direct link between the actions of these tourists and the earthquake a few days later, which killed 18 people, including school children. Well, not all Malaysians, of course, agree with this, but they do believe that these foreigners had acted with entitlement and that they should be punished, because Sabah Parks officials have accused these foreigners of not only stripping, but also urinating and then cursing at one of their staff members.
Right, you can understand that is unacceptable behaviour. There is a line also here, Jennifer, saying that they've been told either 3 months jail or 10 buffalo heads for sacrifice. Is that right?
Well, that is a suggestion from one of the native tribe leaders, but of course they're now being held in detention, and they're possibly facing a charge of public indecency, which could mean jail of up to 3 months, a fine, or even possibly both. Of course, this suggestion about buffalo heads, I mean, this comes from the native tribe customary traditions. It's not clear whether foreigners are subject to this, but certainly there are calls for them to be also tried under traditional native laws. Their lawyer says that they seem to be holding up well, but as you can imagine, they are very frightened for pulling this stunt, and there are lots of angry Malaysians around here who are calling for due punishment for these 4.
Again, you don't know what always some of the beliefs are in the countries that you're going to, and their beliefs and their legal system is the rule in the country. You can't go and behave and do things that you might be able to do here in another country. So just think about some of those things. Just finally, in things of other things you can do to keep safe while you're away, things like if you're getting into a taxi, which could be in various forms, and it could be a bicycle taxi, it could be the back of a truck. But anyway, if you're getting into some kind of public transport, you can kind of pretend even to call someone so the driver knows someone's expecting you at the other end. This is the kind of vehicle I'm in. If it has a license plate number, this is the number. Keep an eye out for me. I'll be about half an hour. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to call them, but it means that the driver knows that actually you're supposed to be somewhere, someone's meeting you, and they're perhaps a little bit more cautious about taking you the long way or not where you were thinking you were going. Try and sit sort of behind the driver, not in the front seat if you can. Public transport in Africa is not like what we would have here. You know, it can be really squashed, as many people that can fit in as possible, maybe some few goats and chickens as well. You know, it's not the same kind of experience. So there are limits to how you can manage that over there. But again, tell people where you're going, or be aware, make sure you know which way you think you're supposed to be going, and perhaps travel with other people is all things that's going to help you. And definitely no hitchhiking anywhere, apart from, you know, maybe in your village, you know, kind of thing, but don't hitchhike with people that you don't know in any of the countries that you're going to. You would generally, who would hitchhike here in New Zealand? Good. Oh, you would. Oh, goodness me. I wouldn't now. And as a tourist, you, as I said, you stand out. They will think that you have more money. You might have fancy phones and things that makes you a little bit more of a target. So as young people, you're going to be travelling on a budget. It is tempting to cut costs wherever you possibly can, which is good. Generally cut costs on things like the amount of beer you might buy instead of a safe way of travelling, okay? So safety should always be your first consideration. And it might mean that it's a little bit more expensive, but please don't hitchhike in Africa, even if you're going to maybe do it here. And finally, socially too as well. We've talked about not taking drugs. Things like drinks, don't leave your drinks unattended if you're at a bar or a nightclub. There are nightclubs in all of the countries that you're going to, for sure. Very easy for someone to put something in your drink, so drink it and then go to the dance floor, or if you've had to leave it unattended, don't drink it. You know, make sure you watch or check out what they're pouring into your drink. It should be from preferably a labelled kind of bottle. If you're not sure, don't drink it. And we've talked about not walking home at night time on your own. So if you're wanting to go out, make sure you're going with your volunteer partner or somebody else. And if you don't think you can get home before dark and you're on your own, don't go. If you're uncomfortable when you're walking somewhere, go back until you're in a more busier area, don't keep going. If you use your gut instinct a little bit and think, oh, I'm feeling a bit dodgy here, go back to where there is more people. So just to summarise that, obviously, hopefully you're getting the message. We take seriously safety. We put a lot of effort into checking things out, and that we hope that you do too. Another thing that you can do, just to finish off this section, and it is compulsory for all of our volunteers, is we need you to register, and you will get information from your VCs soon, because it's getting close to the time you go, where the New Zealand government has a really good website called Safe Travel. So that's the link up there. So sometimes, when you've seen natural disasters or things happen and you see it on the news and they always go, oh, and there's 7 New Zealanders in this country. Those 7 people are the people who registered on this website, right? So there's probably another 50 people there as well who aren't registered. So this is what it looks like. It's really good. You can put in the country that you're going to and get up-to-date advice, but you can also put in another country that you might be planning to travel to and check out what our government is giving you in terms of advice before you plan about going to that country. So you should definitely register. And then how the travel advisories work is they have 3 risk levels. So they might say, oh, there's no travel advisories or risk for this country, and just give you some standard advice. There might be some high risk levels where there might be particular parts of a country that they're advising you not to go to, or things that you should be particularly aware of. And then there's extreme risk. So if you're Googling a country you want to go to and it says extreme risk, don't go there. And it's not a silly thing. If the government is saying don't go, we're advising New Zealanders not to go, often you might not be covered by travel insurance. There might be no sort of diplomatic staff or normal infrastructure in country to provide that support if you disregard that advice. So, wait a minute. So, sometimes people going to Ghana or Malawi, parents are often a little bit nervous about sometimes their children going to Africa and think might be an unsafe country. Are you expecting, when we go through this, and I just gave half the answer away, Ghana or Malawi to be listed as an unsafe country? No? Well, you'll be pleasantly surprised. This is what the New Zealand government's saying about Ghana. There's no travel advisories at the moment. They are saying you should have medical and travel insurance policies. They also give the contact details for the nearest embassy. So there isn't a New Zealand embassy in Ghana, but the closest one is Ethiopia. And then it goes down to give you travel tips, etc. Same for Malawi. That's good. So I always think that's quite reassuring. We go on to then the some risk, which is, as I said about before, when the government is giving more concrete advice. And these are the countries that they are listing. So the UK and Spain, both countries that we go to have a higher risk level than going to Africa, which I think again is reassuring. But again, it's not saying don't go there. It's just telling people to be particularly savvy. And for example, in Spain, which we've got the people going to Spain coming tomorrow, there's a specific update on the recent protests. So this is the kind of information that you should be checking out if you're planning to travel anywhere. And then of course there's high risk. And that's what this looks like. So don't go within 20 kilometres of the border with Colombia because there's a threat of kidnapping. So you'd be a fool if you disregarded that. Not that you're going anywhere near Colombia, but that's what it looks like on the website. Also, what you can do, so if you sign up for the advisories and the alerts, they email you if there is an advisory. You can also do it on Facebook. So you can like the Safe Travel page But you should also go into your drop downs and put the default on you want to receive the notifications. It seems to be quicker on Facebook, so it'll say, oh, there's been a terror attack here, or there's this, and this is the advice of what you should do. We also see that, and then we post in our Facebook groups telling you. So a couple of years ago we did have a terror attack in Brussels. We had volunteers in the UK. It was right on the start of the school holidays. Pretty much all of our volunteers were planning to travel throughout Europe, so we said, put a message out saying the New Zealand government is advising not to go. It was actually really good. The airlines, the hotels, the train companies were allowing people to change. They just didn't want people going there. So we made sure that we were giving this advice in our Facebook groups. And then I'd love to show you the next page, because then I got an email or a message back on Facebook from one girl who's like, no, it's okay, I'm still going to go to Brussels. And then the next post on her Facebook page, which is now being deleted, was, oh my God, I'm in a hotel and there's a bomb threat downstairs. You know, like, if there's advice like that, take it. All right? If we say don't go, don't go. And just to wrap it all up, there are lots of ways that you can keep in touch, developing all the time. WhatsApp seems to be a really good, the cheapest. We don't use it here much in New Zealand, but probably all the other countries do. It's an app you can put on your phone. Certainly the volunteers in Africa, it's the cheapest way for them to contact home. They can text you, you can call. Some of you might use Skype, Viber, Facebook Messenger. Any of them work. Whatever you shouldn't do is use global roaming. It's just really, really expensive. You can get SIM cards in country, so you have a local phone number, and you can get dongles and things in most of the placements that you'll go to, so you can get internet access. Some of your placements will be have better reception than others, and there are a couple of placements that are more remote that you might not get coverage. But again, the country managers tend to take into consideration what you've said you would be comfortable with before putting you in a really remote place. Some people really want to go on the off-the-grid experience, but it's not for everyone. And take lots of photos. Don't rely on the other people taking the photos, because this is a chance in a lifetime. So do keep that, and then back them up. Don't, if you lose your laptop, if you're going to take a laptop or your phone, or something breaks, which is possibly likely to do, the one thing you can't replace is your photos. So things like backing them up on the Dropbox or Microsoft or a hard drive, or even on Facebook, or when my daughter was on her placement in Poland, they would just message them to themselves, so they've got them stored somewhere in the cloud safely. Be careful though about social media and what you're posting. Certainly don't add students or people that you're working with in terms of clients as friends on Facebook. Until you've finished your placement, then it's okay. And think about whether you want to add the staff members. Already, if you've added, say, Nana in Ghana, you're probably getting all these requests from all sorts of people in Ghana to be friends with you. You know, it's not always a good thing to accept them if you don't know who they are particularly, but also they can see what you're posting. And if you are away for a weekend and you've let your hair down a little bit and somebody's taken a photo of you, it's not a good look to have a photo of you posted that all the people at your placement can see. Again, it's harder for you to manage, and it's not good longer term as from an employment perspective as well. So as you're getting to the end of your school careers, it's a good time to tidy up your social media. So that's kind of it for this session, and I'm delighted to say I'm not too far over time, only about 5 minutes. So just in terms of Facebook, it's another tool of communication, You will have had requests from your volunteer coordinator to add you so that we can put you in the closed group for volunteers, and then all of our staff. So that means if there's an emergency, we can message you individually, as well as have your phone number and as well as post in the group. So if you haven't already, please add our staff. If you change your email address, some of you have still got school email addresses. We do need personal addresses while you're away. And parents, if you move house or change phone numbers and things while your son or daughter is away, just please make sure we have updated information so in emergency we can get hold of you. We will have an emergency contact form that we will send you out in the next week or so. And we find that what the volunteers put on the application form is often just absolute waffle about their parents' contact details at the time of applying. So we do want to make sure that we've got the right ones before they go. And before we break for morning tea, does anyone have any questions? Okay, so what we're going to do